Welcome back. In this set of lectures, I'm going to be introducing a new topic, which is a set of movements or a set of thinkers and ideas that broadly can be classified as ecofeminism. There are differences among different authors that would call themselves ecofeminists. It's not necessarily it's not just one set of ideas or one platform. We're going to read two authors that can be describe themselves as ecofeminists, Karen Warren and Val Plumwood. So far we've read Warren, and in this set of lectures I'm just going to talk through a few of the ideas from her article and briefly introduce Plumwood, which we'll read for next week. So Warren's article is intended as a kind of summary statement of what ecofeminism has been and what it stands for up to the point when she was writing this article, which is 1991. She says, ecological feminism is the position that there are important connections, historical, experiential, symbolic, theoretical, between the domination of women and the domination of nature, an understanding of which is crucial to both feminism and environmental ethics. The concept of domination is going to be very important for our discussion of both Warren and Plumwood. Domination, the idea that there's some kind of similarity between the domination of nature and the domination of women, that there's something theoretically productive about noticing that parallel, or even ways that one has helped to support the other. Is if there is any kind of key core commitment of ecofeminism or core idea in ecofeminism, it's probably that idea of some kind of parallel or back and forth influence between the domination of women and the domination of nature. And I think it's useful that Warren notes a few different ways that kind of interplay can happen, that it can happen historically, experientially, symbolically, or theoretically. So a major part of Warren's project in this piece is to identify exactly what is problematic about both the domination of women, the traditional domination of women, and the traditional domination of nature. And this is something that she calls a logic of domination. So she's represented here in this passage, which is included in the original article. It's supposed to be a representation of a kind of traditional way of thinking about humans in their relation to nature. This way of thinking can be expressed as follows: that humans do, but plants and rocks don't, have the capacity to consciously and radically change the community in which they live, that whatever has that capacity is morally superior to whatever lacks the capacity, and therefore humans are morally superior to plants and rocks. And then in addition to that sort of claim of a difference between humans and non-humans, and then a claim of moral superiority attaching to the difference, there's further a claim that domination of one by the other is justified because of the moral superiority. And then that gets us the conclusion that humans are morally justified in subordinating plants and rocks. So Warren's point, after sort of presenting that kind of reasoning, is to highlight the step in the argument which is labeled A4, the claim that moral superiority, as defined here, moral superiority is the moral superiority of this kind justifies domination, justifies the subordination of one to the other. And this is what she calls a logic of domination. So sometimes she says A4 itself is the logic of domination. Sometimes she describes any process of reasoning that goes through all of these steps and includes A4 as a logic of domination. And another point that she wants to make here, because she's really trying to highlight what it is about this kind of reasoning that we should object to. She doesn't think that we need to object to A1. A1 seems pretty true. It's just kind of a statement of fact. And A2 and A3 may or may not be true. There's something that maybe we could debate about. I mean, there's a question about what exactly we mean by morally superior. But A4 we definitely should not agree with because the domination is something bad. And so that's her main point in looking at this process of reasoning, is that we ought to reject the logic of domination, which comes about from an appeal to something like A4. The next point that Warren makes is that when we look at traditional arguments for that are supposed to justify men dominating women, or male, basically, men having more control over society and over what happens to women, men having more power than women, and so on. The form of reasoning often goes something like this. And Warren is concerned to highlight in this description of the form of reasoning, we could probably produce a form of reasoning that's similar that didn't mention nature or women's connection to nature. But Warren is concerned, she wants to highlight in this description a particular kind of traditional association between women and nature. And so the way she expresses this reasoning is as follows. Women are identified with nature in the realm of the physical, men are identified with the human in the realm of the mental. So men, it's sort of like men are more human than women, or men are more fully human, and men are more mental or rational than women. Women are more like physical and bodily and more connected with their bodies or maybe with nature. Now, that's obviously not an idea. V1 is not an idea that Warren is inclined to agree with, but it's supposed to express this kind of traditional idea, this traditional part of this traditional process of reasoning in support of male dominance. The second premise, B2, is whatever is identified with nature in the realm of the physical is inferior to whatever is identified with human in the realm of the mental. So in other words, mental is better than physical, or mental is better than bodily, rational is better than bodily, and human is better than non-human, perhaps for reasons like those expressed in the last argument we just looked at. Thus, it's concluded that women are inferior to men and men are superior. And so far, we don't know exactly what inferior and superior mean. So it's parallel to the claim of moral superiority that was expressed in the last argument. But then after that, we get B4, which is the analog of A4. So this is where the logic of domination comes in B4. For any x and y, if x is superior to y, then x is justified in subordinating y or dominating y. And therefore, in B5, men are justified in subordinating or dominating women. So the point, there are a number of points that Warren wants to make about this, but one of the points, or the main point, is that we really should not accept B4. That B4, the premise that introduces domination as justified, is certainly a morally problematic one that we should reject. One way that Warren puts this is that some feminists oppose B1, and some feminists don't oppose B1, but rather oppose B2. So she's noticing that there's a kind of split within what could be called ecological feminism, that some ecological feminists so far, or I should put this more carefully. There's a split within what can be called feminism, that some feminists so far have rejected B1 but have accepted B2. And some feminists have rejected B2 but accepted B1. So some ecofeminists in particular have said, yes, women are associated with nature, and women are associated with the body, that women are more in touch with nature in their bodies and men are less in touch with nature in their bodies. But this is actually an argument for why women should lead and why women know more about things than men do, because women are actually closer to what is the most, the sort of greatest source of wisdom, which is nature and their bodies, and men are not so close to it. So that would be a case of a position that accepted B1 but rejected or reversed B2 and held that B2 isn't the case, okay? And then the rest of the argument would be different too as a result. Warren's point here is that whatever we say about B1 and B2, whether we accept them both, reject them both, accept one but reject the other, whatever we say about them, okay, there could be a lot of disagreement about those. We all ought to reject B4 because that's the really morally problematic claim. That's the one where we introduce some justification for domination. And I think she really gives two reasons to oppose B4. One is that B4 supports domination, so that's supposed to be a pretty strong argument because presumably, I think she thinks presumably we think domination is bad. It involves like one type of thing forcing another type of thing, one entity or being forcing another entity or being to do things against its will or against its own judgment or against what it freely would have chosen. Okay, and so that's thought to be a bad thing. But then the other reason to oppose B4, she says, is that opposing B4 gives the right kind of framework for feminism, a framework that we can build coalitions around, that we can build solidarity around, rather than some of the other proposals for a core commitment of feminism, which tend to be more, as she puts it, unity-based, as in they tend to be based on some common attribute or characteristic. And one of the problems she says that feminism has faced is that women in different parts of the world and women in different types of conditions and even women with different ideological commitments, they end up fitting in different categories. It's not clear exactly what is the category of commitments that would sort of put all, or excuse me, what's the category? It's not clear what's the category of experiences or the category of conditions, social conditions, that would justify putting all women in the same camp and advocating for their interests together, because women's interests can be very different depending on their social position, the place in the world where they live, and so on. But opposing a logic of domination is something that could actually unify all feminists and also could bring people in to support that opposition to a logic of domination from outside of feminism. So even people that aren't currently affiliated with feminism could line up to support the rejection of B4. So she thinks the rejection of B4 is strategically useful because it's something that we can get a lot of people to rally behind. Now, there's a lot of other interesting stuff in this little 3-page abridged version of the article from Karen Warren. I mean, there's more to talk about, but I want to just focus on one aspect of it, which leads us to be able to ask a kind of critical question here about Warren's ideas. So Warren says, feminism must embrace ecological feminism if it's to end the domination of women, because the domination of women is tied conceptually and historically to the domination of nature. Here, what she's saying is feminists have to be ecological feminists. If you're a feminist, then you have to also be opposed to human domination of nature. And then the other part of this quotation is, a responsible environmental ethic also must embrace feminism. Otherwise, even the seemingly most revolutionary, liberational, and holistic ecological ethic will fail to take seriously the interconnected dominations of nature and women that are so much a part of the historical legacy and conceptual framework that sanctions the exploitation of non-human nature. So here she's saying, any good environmental ethic, if you want to be an environmentalist, then you have to also be a feminist. So what I want to ask here is the connection between feminism and environmentalism, as she's described it, as she's provided reasons to think that those two things are connected, is the connection as close as she wants it to be? In other words, is it the case that in order to be an environmentalist, one has to be a feminist? Is it the case that in order to be a feminist, one has to be an environmentalist? And I am not entirely convinced, based on what Warren has said, that either of those things are true. She gives some reasons why. She tries to argue that you have to be a feminist if you're an environmentalist, or you have to be an environmentalist if you're a feminist. I probably describe myself both as a feminist and as an environmentalist, but I'm not convinced that the only way to be that one can't even be an environmentalist unless one is feminist. That argument, I think, is harder to make, and nothing that Warren has said has entirely convinced me. So I raise that as a critical question for you to think about in the wake of having studied Warren's argument here.